I would really, really love if we could keep this as actionable as possible, right? Like, I would really, really love if there were a few things that people could take away here, that how they could actually engage and make some change here. So first of all, maybe introduce yourself, like, with a sentence or two, and like your previous relationship with Foresight, and your vision for a really, really good future.
I'm Samo Buria. I've come to Foresight Talks for a very, very long time now. I've greatly enjoyed all the events, and a really excellent future would be, I think, one of universal human flourishing, where we can debate whether animals are also ethically human. I tend to say yes, but baby steps, one step at a time.
Hi, I'm Dekai. I'm an AI professor. I've been working in AI for 35 years. Did a lot of the foundational work for things that led to Google Translate and Microsoft Translate and so on. I think that I'm alternating weeks between Berkeley's ICSI and Hong Kong's University of Science and Technology. I would like to see a future where AI is helping us as human cultures to overcome our tendency toward framing biases and not understanding the framing of other cultures before the opposite use of AI to foment divisiveness and fear based on not having that understanding rips civilization apart and causes us to use AI weaponry to destroy ourselves.
Nice, great. And you got a few claps over here. Okay, Jessica.
Right, I'm Jessica Cussins. I'm an AI policy specialist with the Future of Life Institute and a research fellow at the UC Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. I've been involved with Foresight for a year now. It's my third event. My vision for a good future is one in which we have widespread global cooperation and can counter some of the current race dynamics that we're seeing, and additionally massively democratize services and resources so that we can end world hunger and enable widespread healthcare and education, and also empower more people to create with AI tools.
My name is Mark Miller. I'm not an AI specialist. With regard to specialty, I would say probably I'm a cybersecurity specialist and a programming language design specialist. However, I've been very interested in strategic matters of the future, of expanding intelligence versus dangers, and I'm a skeptic with regard to a lot of the normal framing of AI danger issues. I think that there's a very different way to look at a lot of the danger issues.
Nice, and you can probably chime in on that in a little bit when we hear a few of the strategies. So Samo, if you'd like to start with a quick summary of your existential hope strategy in the next 30 years, how do we get to a reasonably good future for AI?
Well, if we try to keep this as actionable as possible, as oriented towards concrete steps, I think what would be very useful would be a conference or a gathering or an organization, ideally something like an AI Scientist Association within the next 5 years, where we try to identify what are the highest risk kinds of AI research and what would be the technical specifications of what this kind of research looks like. There's a possibly more controversial step that can be seen up there, which is sort of like mass surveillance of possibly, unfriendly development efforts, of efforts that are perhaps like, illicit in some sense or being used incorrectly. But it's firstly a technical question whether such footprints even exist. And that's a debate that's useful whether or not you implement, machine-assisted AI regulation. One of the things that we have to consider is that the mass of software out there is growing in general. So even outside of AI, if you want to regulate software, it seems very natural that over time governments will start using software to try to regulate software, much as some governments are already trying to use software to regulate people. I feel the latter is more technically, more ethically fraught, but the former seems like quite achievable for all kinds of software, not just AI, but there is an open question whether AI regulation makes sense. So in the next 5 years or so, an association that gathers the relevant technical data, information, see if we already have things that could be known as footprints of more dangerous or less dangerous products, or benign efforts or less benign efforts. And then on a more 15-year time scale, basically these specs have become an industry standard, and there is an international effort where experts from many countries come together, and there is overlap in staff. This is particularly important. You know, one of the things I very often do in my work, I work on political risk, is I try to analyze relevant historical case studies. In my opinion, one of the best ways governments end up sharing information and end up cooperating is when information sharing happens first, and information sharing happens almost involuntarily, because then cooperation is a fait accompli. The governments just formalize an already existing cooperation. So if on the 15-year time scale, there are Chinese AI experts regularly working in American organizations and American AI experts regularly working in Chinese organizations, it would take an act of political will to break down cooperation. And it's much more likely in that case that political will would, if anything, formalize and make official this international cooperation on these questions. So that's my overview of the plan.
Anyone like to chime in here? Perhaps especially about like the monitoring or proposed regulation part. Do you see this as a likely scenario? The staff exchange? No? Alrighty. Okay, cool.
Does that mean that's so crazy it's not even worth commenting, or so common sense that it's, you know?
So I'm very skeptical of the framing of what normally goes by regulation. Regulation means that there is some system of judgment that gets to intervene in some other system of judgment. And you always have to ask, is there any reason why the system of judgment that we're giving the power to intervene is something that is less corrupting than the system of judgment that we're subjecting to the intervention? I think that a much more robust approach is to find a framework of voluntary interaction where one agent is not able to forcibly intervene inside the brain of another agent, but rather there's a system of law-like or rule-like interaction, framework of interaction governing what these things can do with and to each other. And the ideal we should be striving towards in general are systems of voluntary cooperation where the intelligence of the aggregate system comes from the composition through cooperation of the specialized knowledge of the components. And we see that that's a common element both in software systems and in human society, and now in our overall civilization, which is already a composite system of both humans and software systems interacting mostly voluntarily.
That's certainly a very, that's, I think, first off, an accurate observation as to the state of law and the evolution of ethics in human civilization over the last 10,000 years. I think it is a very good intuition that can probably be formalized, maybe on the level of something like once human minds and AI minds of great power coexist, that there's something like the inviolability of minds, this sort of idea that you're not supposed to, like, you know, corrupt the thinking process of another being. I see nothing to object there, but just to bring back to the proposal itself, there is a concrete reason why I expect the aggregate judgment of this kind of regulation would be better than, you know, a non-regulated environment. The concrete reason was precisely the, first off, a widely disseminated set of like shared knowledge as to what are likely on technical grounds to be more or less risky AI efforts. Just as in, say, the nuclear industry, there might be intuitions what are more or less risky reactor designs. So that would be the 5-year thing. And then the intermingling of experts makes it so that the sides cannot keep secrets from each other or make it very difficult to keep secrets from each other. And this then makes cooperation straightforwardly better and the benefits of defection just like lower than they might be. So there's less temptation for a kind of AI risk situation. And it's very easy to bootstrap off of general risk and security concerns to organizations working on risk and security to intermingling of, again, I focus on the US and China because I feel these are the world leaders in AI technology. You know, maybe 15 years from now, say Germany or Japan are relevant again, but right now it really doesn't look like that's going to be the case. You know, no offense, Allison. I'm Slovenian too. I moved here because the action's here, right? Yeah. Thank you for that.
So I think there's a potential thing to examine more closely in the framing of what you were observing, which is that it's not clear where the line is between just saying something that influences how you think versus the opposite extreme of an actor controlling what you're thinking. And it's not just in terms of my language as a speech act is actually changing how you think, but also in terms of other mundane things even today. Like if you're using Waze or Google Maps or whatever, I mean, I don't know about you, but I implicitly trust it. I turn over navigation and like it's become for me an unconscious process to follow Google Maps when I'm driving. And that is aggregating a lot of other people's knowledge about traffic conditions and so forth. So I think increasingly we're going to have a lot of that kind of phenomena where it's more of almost of a hive mind intelligence. And it may be hard to find a way to separate those cases cleanly.
So I want to propose a radical extension of John Stuart Mill's a form of defense of free speech as a way to understand sort of a radical meaning of voluntarism in information systems. John Stuart Mill's defense of free speech is essentially the common phrase that we often hear that the best defense against bad speech is more speech. I very much, by the way, like Brewster's recharacterization of that. The best defense against bad speech is more context, but in both cases, the answer to bad information is informational. John Stuart Mill never imagined that speech itself could not be harmful. We all understand that much speech can be harmful. The question is, what's the appropriate framework in which to respond to the dangers, the harm that can be caused by bad speech? And John Stuart Mill was very much concerned with the long game. And in the long game, we don't know what the truth is. We don't know what the right information is. So we need the open-endedness of letting information answer information to settle out with that. Okay, now let's project into computer systems and modern information systems, and let's just talk computer to computer. Within digital systems, there is no violence possible within the network. You only send bits over wires. You don't send force. However, we have a tremendously insecure infrastructure so that when a virus, for example, is sent over the network, it effectively does brain surgery on the receiver, which seems like exactly the form of violence that I was trying to avoid. However, given that computer security is possible, the better answer to the corruption of the receiver by sending the virus is, rather than trying to prohibit sending the virus, upgrade the receiver so that it's not vulnerable to the virus. So in general, there is a natural locality to sending messages, receiving messages, and then being affected by the received message. This goes back to like the foundation of object-oriented programming, where a message in a pure object-oriented programming system, the receiving object responds to it only according to the behavior coded into the receiving object. Now, with knowledge of what that receiving object is, messages can cause harm, but the fact that the response is according to the receiving object means that there's a natural local response to the potential for harm, which is to become less vulnerable to the message, not to not send the message.
Right, and I think that here is the challenge for AI as well as discussion of ethics on how to do that, right? I think this is a really cool analogy. So what we do on our OSs is we install antivirus software to try to block the viruses. And the problem that we're facing now is that memes behave a lot like viruses.
Yeah, can I just, I just want to clarify. When I talk about not being vulnerable, if you're installing antivirus software, then that's a symptom that you have not solved the problem, that you're running on something that's fundamentally insecurable, and all antivirus software is just bailing without fixing the hole.
Right. And so we could broaden that to have, better security, better firewalls, et cetera, to prevent the viruses from getting in the first place. The challenge before us is that when we look at memes as viruses, the fundamental difference is that the users really don't want computer viruses on their machines. And so we willingly install those kinds of defenses. With memes, the insidious thing is that there are many users who actually want those memes. And so, we come to this problem. Yes, context is the best way to defend against, misinformation. The problem is when there's so much of it. We have resource-bounded computation, and we can't deal with an unlimited amount of context. And so the challenge for AI is to help distill that in a way that makes it feasible for an ordinary person to be able to both guard against misinformation and also not feel like his or her free will is being violated by somebody who's deciding what to hold at bay and what to give added context to and what not to give added context to.
And I think this ties in nicely with your 30-year strategy here, which is now up, and it's a mindful universal cultural translator. So could you say a few words about that and about what your 30-year strategy is there and how we could implement it?
Right. So not to go in detail, but I was referring here to a TEDx Oakland talk that I gave 2 weeks ago, where I was trying to lay out the fact that humans, we think in multiple different ways. Most of our processing is decision-making, prediction-making is actually unconscious. It's actually without the attentional mechanisms. Probably well over 90% of our processing is done that way. It's what psychologists would call system one thinking. It's what I call how you're feeling about something, right? And then there's how you think about something. And we have AI models for both of those, right? Thinking about something is more like doing math or playing chess, et cetera, logical reasoning. The thing is that today's AI doesn't really make an attempt to go beyond that at the meta level. What really differentiates intelligence from, basically glorified statistical regression is the ability to be self-aware of how you are feeling or thinking. And so all of these issues that we're talking about, we are doing that. We are talking about how we are thinking. We're thinking about how we're thinking. And so for AI to be able to grapple with any of these problems, we need AI to, on the one hand, be able to do meta-level feeling about its thinking, right? I feel curious, I feel disturbed, I feel confused, I feel something's wrong, I feel a fixed mindset. So what I call mindset, right? But then you also need actual conscious thinking, because mindset is still unconscious meta level. But you need conscious thinking to be able to really analyze on top of that how you are feeling, how you're thinking, and catch the mistakes that your feeling heuristics are making. Maybe you're overlooking biases, and catch the mistakes that your reasoning is making, and do a meta-level analysis of, oh, here's the kind of context that we need to add over here. And by the way, here's how we can add it in a way that is okay ethically for you. You know, I'm not being a censor, I'm giving you information in a way that you think is useful, that is useful. And we can't do that unless we build that kind of AI architecture. So that's kind of like one of the main prongs. What was my second prong?
And you even have betting on goals. You have like a next year plan with meeting across countries
to
really build this universal cultural translation device.
Right, so this alludes, the thing is, when we speak in English, we're framing the reality that we're perceiving in very language-driven ways. We have conventional things that we've grown up with, how we frame issues, that are very different from the way other languages and other cultures frame things. And that accounts for, I think, a lot of geopolitical tension. It accounts for a lot of, misunderstandings. And when I went overseas many years ago and started traveling the world and working around the world, I thought, oh, wow, this is why I chose to work on building AI translators. And then I realized in more recent years, whoa, we have this problem domestically. It's not just English to Chinese or Spanish. It's like coastal Californian to my uncle in Kansas City.
So what's the strategy really?
We really need to build not just universal translators between languages. We need universal cultural translators that are understanding how an idea is being framed in one subculture and being able to reflect it into the English of a different subculture. So that's the second prong, and then the third prong is that we can build this all as technologists. We have some pretty good ideas and already work well underway on how to do this. The biggest challenge is always, how do you get this to be adopted on a sufficient scale to make any impact? And I think that's the thing that we need to really reach out to the community here for help, because it takes a lot more than build it and they will come.
What could they specifically do? Anyone that they could now commit to doing?
So there's a whole range of things. At the most fundamental, it could be just people have particular sets of data that we can work on. We happen to be sitting in one of the greatest sets of data known to mankind. But there's also access to places that could deploy this, places where information regularly gets streamed out. We're looking at working with fact-checking sites. We're talking with them, news media, or even social NGOs, nonprofits, even campaigns, whatever. But the fundamental problem is resourcing, because we can do a lot of the technology in the university labs because it's basic science. It's actually paradigm-shifting science, and research funding is good for that. But to roll it out to the new world, to the real world, we need, there's a nonprofit that's been set up, like what Brewster was saying, and those kinds of things need to get resourced beyond a toy scale in order to be able to deploy nationally to make a difference. So I think that, that sort of nonprofit fundraising is something that could also be done.
All right, well, great. Good case in point. Cool, Jessica, what's your 30-year strategy?
Okay, so I think there's some good news stories here. I think there's lots of things that we can kind of concretely do now, depending on what actor we are and where we're sitting in the ecosystem. So for people who are building AI tools, who are doing AI research, who are in technology companies that are doing these things, you can advocate for an AI safety team. Make that a priority. You can advocate for a fair, transparent, and accountable kind of research group, trying to understand what the impacts of your technology are. You can adopt policies that say, we will cooperate with other actors, we will not contribute to some of these race dynamics. So trying to sort of think about what those incentives are within that institutional culture, and also kind of what values are you building into your teams and building into the algorithms that you are kind of just putting out into the world. So taking accountability for that. If you're sitting in the civil society sector in academia, it's there's so much opportunity to hold these actors to account, both the industry and governments. Researching the areas that are important, and also how do we institute independent audits to actually see how are these algorithms being used. They are already being used to make important decisions on people's lives, so actually looking at what that's doing and seeing if the effect of that is what we want. Finally, if you're in government or policy, there are so many options that are not just kind of anti-innovation regulation, right? We can see procurement strategies that actually say, we're only interested in buying AI systems and AI tools that are safe. Prove to us that this is safe. So you can kind of establish, prove to us this isn't going to discriminate against groups of people. So that's a kind of way that you're just encouraging the type of innovation that you want. So sort of shaping that space in a positive way. Moreover, governments have an important role to play right now in saying, we are weaponizing these technologies, and we have to really think about what those limits are and what kinds of stopgaps we can put in place, particularly around the proliferation of lethal autonomous weapon systems. That's something that governments will probably have to work together to really take some action on. So, knowing that this is a not homogenous community, people play a lot of different roles. I think there are many concrete actions people can take right away to work on securing AI systems now, which also sets in place some of the infrastructure we'll need for much more advanced AI systems that are coming.
Very nice, super concrete. Okay, cool. You have some action items there. Any questions on index cards? Yeah, great. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much. All right. Okay. I would love to see more stress testing or even pen testing of AI to identify adverse outcomes and harmful bias. Do any such bug bounties exist? Can we start?
So I think that this has been a problem in the past, but I've made the argument that I almost do believe that this is a temporary problem because we are already, so there's one form of sort of minimally self-aware AI that's relevant here, which is that you should be aware of what the data that you're selecting to train on is, right? And there's already research that, in research, there's already models that are paying attention to the characteristics of the data and doing good training data selection. It's a very basic form of self-awareness, but it is exactly the kind of thing that will compensate for the kinds of data bias that we've been seeing. Stress testing is kind of, that's kind of like antivirus. You've already let the problem in, and now you have to catch it. Maybe a better approach is to prevent this problem from arising in the first place by catching it, up front.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I completely understand the question, but there's tons of interesting things happening. A recent paper, Model Cards for Model Reporting, trying to say, we can actually standardize what characteristics we're looking for in ML models, and we can record that. So we can just start having some metrics that are in place to see, how does this model do on discriminatory behavior? How does this do in terms of reliability? How does this do in terms of explainability? So starting to have metrics in place and a kind of system and framework for recording that and then being able to use that for accountability. Then, in terms of, there's policy things too. There's a New York algorithm accountability task force. They're actually seeing where is New York City using algorithms in public services? Are they being held accountable to citizens or not? So there's things like that at that level happening. Tons of internal research groups at Google, at Microsoft, at IBM, et cetera. So yeah, there's lots of stuff happening. I don't know if there was a specific area of interest from the question. But.
All right. Maybe one last question from the audience. Anyone? All right. Yes, over there, all the way in the back.
Are you talking about, so you're talking about training the humans instead of the machines?
Making humans more resilient rather than trying to create better translators.
I mean, that's a pretty cute way of expressing a large part of what I actually fundamentally believe, which is that AI is just a mirror, an amplified mirror of ourselves. If we don't fix ourselves, that's not going to solve the problem. And in some sense, the challenge before us is where is the most effective trim tab points for us to break that vicious cycle? And some of this idea that I'm was suggesting is these are tools that we could use to help break that cycle.
I think an important image to have in mind with regard to this question and some of the other earlier questions that we touched on is that an unaugmented human in the presence of adversarial AI-based information systems that are trying to corrupt the human with messages that humans might find attractive, an unaugmented human is pretty helpless because we're not evolved for that kind of adversary. But a human-AI symbiote, I mean, basically a person together with their computer systems that are helping them be skeptical, can be a much better unit for for remaining robust against attempts to send the human corrupting messages. The weak link in that is that the human would need to desire to be augmented in that way.
Right, and so the analogy I was making in yesterday's AI strategy session was I want, not just a Google Maps for my physical reality, I want a Google Maps to help me navigate the subjective realities.
All right. Thank you so much to the panel. I really appreciate it. This was great.